What the scariest true story you know? A woman I worked with a few years ago told me how her life had changed drastically. She went from having a decent job to becoming an alcoholic and working as a cleaner. She had planned to move to Spain with her husband and young daughter and had a great job lined up out there. The plan was her husband and daughter would fly over first and she would fly over a week or two later due to finishing her old job a little later than planned. Her husband rang her on the day he arrived and said the house was lovely and the furniture had arrived by ferry. That was the last time she ever heard from him. Her husband and daughter was found dead by authorities a few days after she rang, explaining she was concerned for their welfare as she had had no contact with them and she was extremely worried. It was carbon monoxide poisoning. It is so scary to think how fast your life can change. When I was 7, I was raking rocks in my aunt's front yard and a beat-up pickup truck pulled up. The man got out, fiddled with something under the hood and then closed it. He asked me, "Hey kid, do you know how to pop a clutch?" Spending my childhood on a farm, I do indeed know how. "Yes," I responded. "Give me a hand real quick," he said. So I started walking towards his truck. At the last second my mom called out to me from the garage and I turned around to see what she wanted. I heard the door slam, the truck start, and he drove away. That memory never really came up until one day, about 30 years later. I jump up after laying down to go to bed when out of nowhere it came back and it hit me. This guy was trying to kidnap me. What the fuck? ? What bullet did I dodge? I mean, you ever have a memory come back and you get scared? I mean scared over the memory. I was shaking for at least a half hour over it. It still freaks me out thinking about it. My brother was a police officer. He had a call to check on the welfare of a mother who had not showed up for work. She had died on the sofa and her little toddler had brought the little diaper pad and laid down next to her, and died of dehydration. The little kid had opened the lower cabinets and drawers in the kitchen looking for food. He still cries about it, and he's not the crying kind. Happened to my boss's best friend when they were around 17. Best friend's parents were out of town one weekend and she had the house to herself. Went about her business having dinner, watching TV, then decided to go to bed. She was lying in her bed with her back to her closet when she heard the door open. She somehow pretended to be asleep. The man who was hiding in the closet walked around her bed to the side she was laying, facing, gently stroked her hair and face, then left. She immediately called her boyfriend to ask him to come over, then called her parents and then the police. Long story short, this man had been getting into their home via a doggy door. They didn't have a dog and didn't bother to secure it, and he'd been living in a tent in this foresty area behind their home for months to creep on her. They found a ton of surveillance footage of her sleeping and pieces of her clothes and stuff. If I recall correctly, this happened somewhere in Alabama, most likely mid-2000s. My maternal grandfather, in the days before hot water on tap, put a big pot on to boil before leaving for work for his wife and kids to bathe with. The pot boiled over and extinguished the flame, and he returned to find them dead of carbon monoxide poisoning. My mother was of his second marriage. The story that inspired Candyman is pretty creepy. A woman in a Chicago apartment was murdered by some drug dealer who lived next door. How did he get into her apartment? Through a hole behind her bathroom cabinet mirror. In the 80s there was a Mexican cult led by an American named Adolfo Constanzo. They used to kidnap random people from tourist towns and nearby cities and perform human sacrifice on them in their rural Mexican desert compound, usually torturing in elaborate rituals for hours or days before finally letting them die. These rituals included vivisections, castrations, eyeball removal, tongue removal, teeth pulling, skin flaying, hanging, etc. They used amphetamines and cocaine to force the victim to stay awake during the torture and not pass out from shock. The cult believed the more pain and fear they could generate in the sacrifice victim, the more powerful the body parts would be as ritual trinkets and also for food for the cult's nganga, which is a large ritual cauldron used to store bones, blood, meat, and other valuable items that the cult believed gave them power. They used to make staves out of wire to gather spinal columns, and they would often eat the victim's eyeballs during the rituals. They are believed to have kidnapped and sacrificed over 26 people to their nganga in their 3 years that they were active from 1986 to 1989. The leader committed suicide when the police showed up at their compound. They arrested 14 cult members, but most people believe there were at least a dozen more that escaped and are still out there. H.G., the lone survivor of what would later be called the Wichita Massacre. She was a 25-year-old elementary school teacher at the time, and had gone to the triplex where her boyfriend, Jason Beffert, a science teacher, lived with 2 roommates, Brad Haka, a chemist, and Aaron Sander, who was studying to become a priest. H.G. settled in front of the TV and began grading papers when Heather Muller, a friend of Aaron Sanders, showed up. The 5 friends watched TV and eventually retired to their various bedrooms. H.G. was woken from her sleep shortly after by loud voices and the bedroom door being kicked open. The 2 perps eventually gathered all of the persons in the residence and herded them to the bedroom and ordered them, at gunpoint, to strip. Many atrocities occurred as hours went by, but in the end H.G., after being shot in the head in a frozen soccer field, ran naked for almost a mile to find a house with Christmas lights, it was mid-December, to beg for assistance. Joseph Fritzl imprisoned his daughter in a secret room in his basement for 24 years, and fathered 6-7 children on her. He actually fucking planned the whole thing 6 years in advance, got a building permit and built a inescapable apartment-like prison underneath his house. He drove miles to dispose of trash and do shopping for the imprisoned and not be recognized while doing so. Seriously fucked up. He was only found out because one of the children he fathered got seriously ill and had to be taken to the hospital after spending her whole 19-year-long life underground. He claimed that his daughter, Elizabeth, thought to have been abducted by a cult, dropped the granddaughter off at his house because she wasn't able to take care of the sick young woman. Doctors found the story fishy, involved authorities and demanded to speak to Elizabeth in order to find out what her daughter was suffering from. I'm on my phone, so please forgive my formatting. In 1949, Timothy Evans was wrongly executed for murdering his pregnant wife and daughter. The actual murderer, John Christie, was a prosecution witness at Evans' trial. After Evans was executed, Christie went on to kill 4 more people. Had the police handled the forensic evidence properly, Christie would have been caught when they were investigating Evans, and those 4 people would still be alive. The government didn't acknowledge that Evans was innocent until 2004. There's a very famous mentally ill crackhead in my city who drives around a bicycle with the front bumper of a car mounted on it. Anyone on foot or a bike thinks he's awesome, but anyone driving a car hates his guts. Anyway, somebody robbed a Jimmy John's and they brought him in for questioning. He confessed, "This guy is extremely mentally ill, he's delusional as fuck." The police for sure bullied a confession out of him, and his lawyer took one look at the surveillance video and just laughed at the police and got him out. It was extremely clearly not him. The blue ring octopus has a venom that causes paralysis, causing people to die of cardiac arrest or because of hypoxia. There is no antidote. The cure is CPR or life support for the hour or so it takes for the venom to leave the body. There was a man who was bitten by a blue ring octopus. As the lifeguard was performing CPR, he was lying on his back on the beach, facing the sky, eyes frozen open. Unable to close his eyes or communicate with the others, he lied there as the sun slowly burnt out his retinas. He became permanently blind. Last year when I was traveling around Australia, I saw a news story about a group of backpackers who had found a blue ring octopus, and one of them uploaded a photo of it on their face. They had no idea it was even venomous, and they're incredibly lucky it didn't sting them. They did get called fucking morons by all of Australia though. The USS West Virginia was a ship damaged during the attack on Pearl Harbor. After the ship was attacked, the people on board heard banging noises coming from inside the ship. Turns out that these noises were people. They were trapped in a room to where they couldn't be broken out of it because of the water that would seep in and drown them, and they couldn't be brought out from the top because of the gases that lingered there that were extremely flammable. When the vessel was salvaged 6 months later, the bodies of these 3 men were found. The other things that remained were empty cans of food and water and a calendar marked from December 7th to December 23rd. This means they were trapped in there for 16 days. They probably kept wondering if they were ever going to make it out, and then had to come to the realization that they might not be saved, and they had the fear of drowning in the tight little compartment of the ship. They had to face the realization that you are going to die and the psychological torture that goes along with it. Based on the pic from the article. If that imgur pic is really from after she went missing but before they found her, then that barely perceptible lump in the imgur image, right above the footboard, between the 2 posts, I'm pretty sure that that's her. ETA. After conducting some genuinely traumatizing and sickening research and looking at other photos from both before and after she was found, that slight lump is, indeed, her. The lump visible between the 2 posts is her rear end, and her head is wedged under the posts, footboard to the right, with her face pressed against the mattress. There was a creepy story that happened in Japan not that long ago. The cops found a 5-year-old and 3-year-old just wandering the streets. He asked them where they came from, and they were 3 kilometers far from their house. When the cops took them home, the mother looked worried and was really apologetic about the situation. Mother was holding a baby. Cop decides to do some research on the family just in case. Files said that the baby daughter the mother was holding should have been much bigger than what he saw. Thought maybe it was a case of neglect. The 2 older kids walking alone was also red flag, so they got officials to visit the house. Asks if they could have a look at the baby daughter. Turns out to be a boy, a whole year younger than the files. Ended up finding the 3rd child buried in their backyard. Something must have happened to the baby. They quickly decided to have another kid to cover it and was planning on raising it as the dead daughter. I can't write sentences/am Japanese. I don't know if it's scary, but when I was younger, me and my twin brother would help our friend do his paper route. One summer we could smell something gross coming from one of the houses. We all didn't think anything of it until 3 days later when the smell was reaching down the driveway. We went to the back door where he normally dropped the paper and noticed it was open. We went in and looked around the house and found the owner dead. He had died of a heart attack and his cats were eating him. This isn't a scary story, but it's spooky and always captured my imagination. One day a bunch of, I think they were police in training, explored some of the catacombs under Paris. A lot of them are completely unmapped. They entered an area and heard dogs barking and snarling. They continued going and saw there were speakers mounted on the wall, playing pre-recorded dog sounds and cameras. They continued. They came into this huge opening and found a cinema. It was lavishly decorated. It had projectors and a mix of old and new movies. It even had electricity running and 3 phone lines. The police marked where they were and went back outside. The next day they returned to try and investigate further with more experienced officers. Everything was gone. All the wiring had been ripped out. All the furniture was gone. All that remained was a note that said, "Do not try to find us." As far as I know, they never figured out who was there. This was posted here the last time. The story is about a woman who was found pushing her baby had been dead on a swing for 2 days. The baby died from hypothermia and dehydration. She was found not criminally negligent due to schizophrenia. A young lady had an affair with her boss in the 1960s, got pregnant. After threatening to tell her boss' wife, she was killed by her boss, who then put her body in an industrial barrel. He hid the barrel in his house for years and none of the various owners opened it due to the weight. Finally one guy decided to dispose of it in the 90s, and when he opened it he saw it contained something. An investigation traced the barrel and girl back to the man, who then killed himself before police could come arrest him after confirming he was the father of the unborn baby via DNA. The lady's mother was in her late 80s when she was told her missing daughter was finally found. She claims that she had been having dreams about her daughter being inside a metal container for years after she had gone missing. I worked in forensic medicine. My boss had to perform an autopsy on a chopped-off head that was found by 2 completely traumatized children. The autopsy itself took 7 hours because the person had over 56 different injuries to the head. I could not speak. I became unconscious. I could not open my mouth because then I smelled something terrible. I heard my daughter snoring in a terrible way. Very abnormal. When crossing to my daughter's bed, I collapsed and fell. I was there till 9 o'clock in the morning of Friday, the next day. Until a friend of mine came and knocked at my door. I was surprised to see that my trousers were red, had some stains like honey. I saw some starchy mess on my body. My arms had some wounds. I didn't really know how I got these wounds. I opened the door. I wanted to speak, my breath would not come out. My daughter was already dead. I went into my daughter's bed, thinking that she was still sleeping. I slept till it was 4:30 in the afternoon. On Friday, the same day. Then, I managed to go over to my neighbors' houses. They were all dead. I decided to leave because most of my family was in Guam. I got my motorcycle. A friend whose father had died left with me for Guam. As I rode through Neos, I didn't see any sign of any living thing. When I got to Guam, I was unable to walk, even to talk. My body was completely weak. There was a mother and son found dead in my city recently. She was 23, he was 5, I think. She locked him in a closet, then shot herself. I want to believe she put him in there so he wouldn't see her dead, but nobody found either of them until he also died, stuck in the door of the closet, trying to escape. My father used to work as a medical examiner. He was the guy they sent when a crime scene contained a dead person, to give a preliminary examination of the corpse before it got sent off for more rigorous investigation. One of his worst stories was being called in for a child, around 9 or 10, that had ostensibly been killed in a drive-by shooting while he and his older brother were playing in the front yard. When my dad examined the corpse, however, the presence of gunpowder burns across his face indicated the shot must have been point blank. His older brother had lied about the shooting. He'd shot him himself. A neighbor just regaled me with this heartbreaker, which isn't terrifying except for its mundanity. His sister, her husband, and 2 kids went up to Washington to camp every year. So they're up there in May, early June, sometime during 2000 to 2003, and the son goes to use the rope swing to jump into the lake. Family watching, fun times. But the boy botches the jump and ends up with the rope around his ankle, falls badly, breaks a bone, and is just dragging underwater, flailing. Dad immediately springs into action to save his son and dives into shallow water, smashes his skull open, is instantly paralyzed and drowns. The mother obviously goes to save them both, dives into the water, and dies of a heart attack. The son stops flailing, and is just hanging there. The daughter, 10 years old, had no idea 2 minutes prior that she would be sitting safely on shore. Watching her family die, fucking heartbreaking. She was raised by my neighbor as a daughter. I just can't even imagine what the fuck that would be like. Just normally mundane risks proving lethal in less than 200 heartbeats. My grandma grew up on a farm. She was over at a friend's for the night, and as they were getting in bed, the other girl said, "Oh, we forgot to check the pasture gate." They got out there and my grand says, "We locked this." Her friend's almost casual response, "I know. There's a man under the bed." It wasn't uncommon for drifters to show up places like that, and this was what they were taught to do.